There is nothing better than the feeling of heading home after a long day at work. Something about the call of comfort and familiarity that awaits for you just a short distance away. A bit of warm food and something to settle you in. The sounds and sights of the moor are something that you've always been used to, a seemingly endless landscape that spreads out in front of you. There's something about every single step that feels somehow familiar and somewhat as though this is the first time you've ever set foot in this particular spot all at once. It's the mist that does this. That's the best you can figure anyway. You've heard all the stories. Something is out there. Something that has no business padding the moorlands around here. Something bigger than normal, something more vicious or more deadly. Like all the stories and legends, they seem like absolute nonsense at the time. Nothing more than tall tales from people who want to make the most of a relatively minor situation. Or, more likely, tourists who have literally zero experience with the local wildlife seem to somehow end up confusing a perfectly normal sight or sound with something that isn't. But in the gathering dusk, the stories feel a little more real. When the sun's light is sealing itself away down below the horizon and the darkness is clawing its way across the landscape, swallowing up the hollows and the dips all around you, it suddenly feels as though you are reassessing all these stories. As though you are reviewing them once again in the half-light around you. As someone who's spent countless minutes, days, and probably weeks by this point on the moors, you feel confident that you can identify every sight and sound. But something about this rapidly gathering dark and the mist that seems to linger far longer than it ever did has somehow got you jumpy. It's got you on edge, feeling something deep inside of you flinching at every sound and every movement. And instead of the sounds and sights all at once, it is the silence that gets you. You can hear your own breath. You can hear the sound of your footsteps squelching through the sodden turf under your feet. But suddenly, there's nothing else. No birds chirping, no distant calls through the mist. All of a sudden, it's as though you have been left entirely alone on the moor, and it is not a pleasant feeling. You stop, you look, you listen. There's always life around, always something making noise, always some sign of some other living being around. It's all there all the time. You just need to take time to notice. But nothing seems to come. Your mind casts back to the stories that you've heard, the tales of the beast, and the rational part of your brain that's telling you it isn't possible is barely audible over the silence. Finally, a sound, or what might have been a sound. Just another acknowledgement that there is life out there with you. But the footfalls sound unusually heavy. Not nearly loud enough to be another person, but definitely heavier than anything else you would expect here. A shape starts to emerge out of the endless gray all around you. First, it seems to be like a wildcat. Not very common down here, but definitely something that would make sense. But the closer it comes, the more it doesn't make sense. It seems too big and too confident. Everything about it seems slightly bigger and somehow more intimidating than anything else you've come across. It's as though it grows with every step that it takes towards you, like its body just fills out more and its height increases with every time the paws touch the ground. It looks bulkier and more substantial with every bit of the distance that it closes. And not one thing about it seems bothered about the fact that you're standing there, the fact that a full-size adult is right in front of it. It keeps coming, eating up the distance between the two of you as you stand frozen, watching and feeling entirely incapable of doing anything else except for remembering. Even when it pauses less than 10 feet away, you already know its head is bigger than anything you'd expect to encounter. And when it flashes these teeth, it is unlike anything you've ever seen. You look down and see the claws protruding from its massive paws, and there is something about it that strikes you as a little different. The cold sweat on your neck is only a temporary sensation as it seems to freeze instantly in the gathering fog. Whatever is in front of you sniffs again, seemingly assessing you, and with just a little ceremony it turns around and pads off back into the grayness all around. Once again you are left alone with nothing more than the gathering dusk, the feel of sweat on your skin, and a bit of a story to tell. What you just heard is one of the many encounters that people claim to have had with what has become known as the beasts or beasts of Bodmin Moor. While it may lack the pizzazz and appeal of some of the other cryptids that we have looked at on this channel, there is one attribute that we need to say from the start that it is doing quite well: plausibility. Yes, the kryptonite of every myth and legend ever. The silver bullet that seems to slay every tale that we all enjoy looking into and believing might be true. Sort of like, what was that thing in Colorado that eats loggers? It just kind of slides down and it looks like a whale on the side of a mountain. I cannot remember its name, but good lord, that one does not have any plausibility. Anyways, what's unusual about the Beast of Bodmin Moor is that the usual suspects for shooting these ideas down from a great height are not so clearly decided on this phenomenon. The scientists and rationalists, the biology specialists like me being a diet nerd, and the naturists that are seemingly predisposed to hating and cutting the legs out of every interesting story that falls short of scientific proof, they might just be starting to agree on this one. So strap in for an unusual entry into our long list of cryptid tales that have been absolute nonsense, because this one here might not be as much of an excitement or extreme claims as usual, but one where we might actually be on the side of science and rational thinking, just for a change anyway. So let's head over to jolly old England and see what all the fuss is about. It's not jolly over there, let's be real here. So we'll start with the obvious. Bodmin Moor is located in England and is mainly located in the country of Cornwall towards the southwest of the country. Measuring in at around 80 square miles or 200 square kilometers, it features many prominent peaks as well as areas of natural beauty, but all spread out over the general area and otherwise filled by endless lengths of non-specific moorland, stretching endlessly as far as the eye can see. Many of these higher peaks can be subject to both early morning mists and fog during the day, making them a prime location for the sorts of encounters that we seem to always be discussing, ones where there are some other elements at play. And this may be going kind of away to explaining why it seems to have always been like there's this explosion in frequency and the regularity of these odd sightings that seem to defy reason. It's kind of increasing. But what we do need to actually talk about from the start is establishing the fact that we will not be limiting our discussion to just these expansive moors and the many incidents that have occurred there. In fact, it would be unfair to do so. In reality, there have been sufficient, reasonably provable, or at least plausible sightings in many other areas in the locality within England that would make it seem unfair to just limit ourselves to exact places. Instead, we'll look at the numerous sightings and encounters that seem to span the entire length of the British Isles and are presently fairly consistently basically just happening through many hundreds of years. The fact remains that encounters with these big cats, the beasts of Bodmin Moor, are not something that has been localized to just one place or one time. We can comfortably go back hundreds of years and find tales of people encountering large, almost predatory cats that were not supposed to be in the local area. And some of them are from people who would arguably at least be able to know the difference. Like me, for instance. I'm a cat enjoyer. Dr. Mambo is in the other room screaming for dinner. He's not even medically trained yet. I'm sure I could identify him. One of the first roundly reported encounters was reported in 1820 by a young man named William Cobbett. The man who would grow up to be a respected writer and spoke about his encounter with the beast as a child at a much later date. The encounters listed by normal citizens are many and they span years, but there are a significant amount that are from people in occupations or with personal histories where they would be well accustomed to the normal animals that would be expected and are aware of any differences. The one thing that pushes these encounters above the norm is the fact that the very people that are going on these walks in the moors are the ones that are going to be out in the back and beyond where these encounters are predisposed to happen, and they also just appear to be professionals to a certain degree. While this isn't proof in any sort of serious or bulletproof format, it is something that maybe adds credibility to their statements, their assumed measurements, and their ability to notice the difference between a normal local animal and these beasts. If we look into the modern era, whatever we classify that as, probably right now, we could assume that not only would these encounters kind of increase, but the evidence would as well. And to a certain extent, that might just seems to be the case when we review it, at least at the surface level. One source cites the number of sightings between the early 80s and late 90s as floating somewhere between the latter half of the 50s and possibly up into like the beginning portions of the 70s. So somewhere probably between about 58 to 73 sightings. However, cut to the 2000s and in the first 10 years, that number rose close to 200. That feels like a massive increase, one that flies in the face of what is to be expected and what is normal for any paranormal entity or cryptid. They always seem to shy away as technology improves or the amount of people in the area increase, so what is really happening here? And what about some other big cat encounters that also seem to have become prevalent across England basically along the same time frame? It might be worth looking into some of them and seeing if there's any information there that we can use to color our idea of what we're dealing with here. If we travel about an hour by car from Bodmin Moor and go to Plymouth, we can hear about all the sightings there. Is this the same animal or set of animals? Is the distance close enough to be reasonable? It would really depend on what precisely we believe the beasts of Bodmin Moor might be. The most famous and recent sighting, and another that comes with photographic proof actually, is from 2015 when a woman named Carol saw a large cat in the garden just outside of Plymouth. Again, in almost strict contravention to the usual cryptid standard, she took a relatively clear and clean picture of this thing. She said that while she thought it may have been a fox at first glance, it definitely appeared larger. It was only after the fact, when looking back over the photographs, that she even realized for herself that it was something that appeared far beyond the normal physical specifications specifications of any wild animal that would be expected in the region. To be honest with you, if anybody remembers the Beast of Gévaudan, maybe there's just big cats that roam Europe. Maybe the Europeans aren't doing anything about it. What are you doing over there, Europeans? Because we also have another example of a similar mystery, and that's about a massive paw print that was discovered in 2016, albeit a little further afield in Cornwall. A set of footprints in the mud around 4 inches wide were photographed and measured by traveling tourists. The size of these prints left those that saw not only the images but the actual prints themselves to believe that they could have been left by something around the size of a lion. A few months later, a similar encounter would have been experienced in the same area. A driver reported a massive creature leaping out in front of him, and after authorities investigated, they found large paw prints in a nearby clay pit as well as a deer that had its head removed. For some people, these encounters are a one-off thing, a single encounter that is more than enough to make them believe that they had seen something that isn't quite right. But for others, it seems as though it's a reoccurring theme. In a place called Redruth, a local man named Sid, and somebody's like, no, it's Redruth. I'm telling you it's gonna happen. Anyways, a local man named Sid Yates had an encounter with the beasts of Bodmin Moor, and his first reaction was not just the usual surprise and shock. Instead, there seemed to be an element of not again in his retelling. This last sighting was in 2013, and he saw the beast in the early morning. In his own words, he described it as such. It looked a bit like a black Labrador, but it had longer legs and a tail, as well as a flat nose. It was definitely the Beast of Bodmin and not a dog. It then crossed the road and got into the old stables near my house and disappeared. I spoke to the other people in the village about it, and they said there was a sighting a few years ago on the other side of the village. Sid, a man in his 70s, would go on to explain that this was the third time that he had spotted the beast in his lifetime. And there are even more general discoveries, sightings, and small pieces of information that all seem to roughly tie together to add to that hint of plausibility to the stories and to the legends, even if none of them are specifically compelling in and of themselves. Homeowners finding dogs' legs fully detached lying in the grass with no sign of an injured pet nearby and really no explanation. Half-remembered stories of moor walkers encountering animals that seemed a little too big or too confident. Livestock being damaged in a way that farmers and shepherds didn't recognize as a typical or usual predator. Nothing more than vague and general tales that all help to bolster the story, especially when viewed alongside the more concrete and solid stories provided. While there are those that naturally are speculative about the nature of these sightings, there is a strong and growing amount of evidence for the fact that there simply cannot be that many people that have gotten these things wrong over the lengths of time that we are discussing. The more obvious theories write themselves, essentially. The truth is that there's a genus or species of large cat that has been roaming this area for multiple hundreds of years and has never been assessed, captured, or identified by science. In fact, I think it's like the Cloudin Cat or something like Cloudin cougar. Basically a big cat that we thought was extinct that we've just recently in the last couple of years saw as like scientists and then pictures of it. Well, there you go. We thought it was definitely gone and it definitely wasn't. So absolutely, some people attribute it to something a little more out of the realms of reality, where it's an animal that surpasses every sort of human expectation, a sort of four-legged boogeyman that haunts the moors and keeps a keen eye on any and all who have the gall and lack of common sense to trespass in their land. But for many locals, this isn't even a theory by this point. This is simply a truth that is known to them and yet to be nailed down by the conventional science. After all, this isn't like many of the other stories that we have covered. Many of the people that have encounters have had plenty of knowledge and experience with the wildlife, especially with the type that would be expected around this area. Most have at least the know-how and the past experience to correctly identify what they would be looking at. And the photographs, of which many exist, certainly seem to show something a little out of the ordinary. Surely enough to make even the most skeptical of people to consider that there might be something more than meets the eye stalking the moors. And I am serious about that, and don't call me Shirley. Strangely, and trust me, this feels weird for me too, this section about the most plausible theories is one that seems to be the easiest to kind of construct. Unlike a lot of other things that we have looked at, there are actually very few that deny the existence of at least something is unusual in the location that has been mentioned. The basic reality is that the number of sightings, especially ones that have persisted through the era to the modern technology that we have, and have actually managed to somehow increase in the age when everyone has a high-powered camera in their pocket at all times, makes me feel like it's a little bit more believable than most. So although it may feel like a default position on anything that is not nailed down and set in concrete by science at this point, it might be just to be disbelieved, This might not be the case for the beasts of Bodmin Moor. An interesting law came into effect in the 1970s in the UK, which was called the Dangerous and Wild Animals Act, that heavily reduced the capacity of ordinary citizens to hold, possess, or keep any pets that were classified as fitting into this category. While this act completely sidetracked those that owned or held safari parks or zoos, or basically any other iteration if an animal collection was being utilized by the owner and they charged money for the public to view the animals, it caught a surprising number of people in a sort of no man's land. There was a large number of people that held private collections in the UK at that time, ones that had obtained various animals through different means. And with the stroke of a pen and the passing of a law, which is pretty standard for England, oh God, I'm glad we separated from them, they were suddenly left in a very awkward position. Anyone who held a big cat as a private pet, but wasn't directly or currently involved in the running of a zoo, was confronted with a strange ultimatum, and one that many allegedly solved, and really the most, it could be said bizarre, but in the laziest way. One of the most prevalent theories regarding the sudden prevalence of big cats on the moors seems to tie in with the beast's seeming inability to comply with the normal routine of sightings, tailing off as time passes. People seem to believe that any who held these animals in their private collections made the heartbreaking but ultimately sensible, I guess, decision to release these animals into the wild. And unlike most cases where we look into, it seems as though the science actually backs this one up. There was an official investigation carried out in the mid-1990s where the Agricultural Development Advisory Service analyzed all the evidence available and around the area, but essentially realized that they could not prove definitively that there was or wasn't a number of big cats roaming the area of Bodmin Moor. This was their official conclusion. It was accepted at the start of the investigation that it would never be possible to prove that such an animal or animals did not exist, but it was believed that if they did, hard evidence would be forthcoming. People helpfully supplied material for the investigation and reported sightings, suspected livestock kills, and injuries. No verifiable evidence for the presence of big cats were found, but there were only 4 suspected livestock kills reported in nearly 6 months, none of which gave any indication of the involvement of anything other than native animals and dogs. There is no significant threat to livestock from a big cat on Bodmin Moor. Despite this, though, interestingly, there would be some DNA analysis carried out within the last year or so on another piece of fur found in a different country. I'm going to try this. Gloucestershire. Cockapoo-pee-pee-shire. They had been suffering their own strange sightings and livestock injuries. The scientists that analyzed this genetic material left behind stated that it was almost categorically of the same form of big cat. That statement from the team is as follows. The DNA cut from the hairs caught on a barbed wire fence where there had been some unusual predatory activity. It has taken us 5 years for the production team to find such evidence and film its journey from collection to analysis. Some people of Gloucestershire and Britain have described what appears to be black leopards for decades, so a leopard DNA result from the black hair sample is unsurprising. This is not the first such DNA result and is unlikely to be the last. There's a great deal of secondary evidence for these cats, such as consistent witnesses reports, but hard evidence like DNA is difficult to get. So the contribution from this documentary is very helpful. Collecting such evidence from the local people, farmers, and landowners is essential. Citizen science like this will hopefully help us learn about the Bagheera-type big cats, which may be quietly naturalizing here. So there you have it. The sightings and encounters with the beasts of Bodmin over the centuries that seem to persist over hundreds of years. As always, please come forward with your own thoughts and opinions on the case in the comment section below, but this is as much as we'll say. Unlike the usual times when we are defending and boxing off low-key attempts to make this appear like something it's not, it's a bit different. The most recent and up-to-date information seems to back the case. The most cutting-edge science is on our side, and the factual and real evidence provided by those that are usually naysaying or criticizing from the wings is actually the most up-to-date and compelling evidence that we've got. And it seems more than in most other cases that there is certainly something a little out of the ordinary wandering the moors around Bodmin and further afield. So until next time, please like and subscribe for more stories like this. So I think we will wrap it up there. I want to thank you guys for watching. As I just said, if you enjoyed, then leaving a like and subscribing would be great of you. And I'd like to thank my patrons real quick. At the Literal Wendigo tier, we have Brayley Hoover, Grayson West, Stupid Fox, and Trash Panda in a Trench Coat, which Trash Panda in Trench Coat is holding it down on both Patreons. Thank you all for your support. At the Eyewitness to the Event tier, we have Beaver Malaga, Wet Skeleton. At the First Hand Accounts, we have Cody Cherry Drake, Pimp Daddy Shamrock, and Yeeps, as well as Bianca. And then, oh, no, that's the second hand accounts. At the second hand accounts, we have Bianca, Kanan Johnson, Fred Rush, and Troy. And to the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support. It goes a long way towards helping out, and you're absolute ballers. But alright, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.